coast to coast, direct from Austin. You're listening to the Alex Jones Broadcasting Network.
Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
We're live. We have a huge broadcast lined up for you on this 30th day of July, 2014. But I was rewatching a report from about 2 weeks ago that David Knight filed. I was watching it last night, and it's so good, I thought I would air an excerpt of it. Prison Planet of the Apes with our own co-host, David Knight. This is the type of stuff that airs every night, 7 o'clock Central, with InfoWars Nightly News.
There's a new book that's come out. It's called Animal Madness: How Anxious Dogs, Compulsive Parrots, and Elephants in Recovery Can Help Us to Understand Ourselves. Now, the interesting thing about this book is that rather than looking at drugs being tested on animals, it takes drugs that have first been, of course, tested on animals, then used routinely on humans, and now have gone full circle back into the zoo. And so it provides us some interesting insights. And of course, in reviews, people have talked about anthropomorphism. In other words, projecting human characteristics onto animals. I say to speak of mental illness in animals requires a degree of anthropomorphizing, or this is a humane, insightful, beautifully written book. Animal Madness gives anthropomorphism a good name. What about anthropomorphism in reverse? Yes, are we treating humans like animals? Let's take a look at a couple of the excerpts from the book, but before we do, there's also another school of thought in how we control animals, and of course is the B.F. Skinner Behavioral Modification School. We use positive operant conditioning to control the animals. Skinner's techniques are actually a humane way to communicate with and to control animals. The problem arises with the reverse anthropomorphism, when Skinner starts to treat humans as animals, devoid of freedom and dignity. Of course, much of our government's interaction with everyone from children in schools to airplane travelers with TSA is based on positive operant conditioning. In other words, let me touch you wherever I want, and I'll reward you with allowing you to get on a plane. Now, of course, the other popular way to control people is with pharmaceuticals.
If Mr. McMurphy doesn't want to take his medication orally, I'm sure we can arrange that he can have it some other way.
Brightman's book gives us some perspectives on that. Now, Thorazine, of course, was first tested on rats, and what they found was that even though rats could easily climb up a rope to get to some food, once they put them on Thorazine, they couldn't be bothered. Even when they knew a shock was coming on, they would just sit there. What happened when they gave Thorazine to a gorilla in the zoo? This is a gorilla that was going to have to be relocated to a very small cage for a period of 6 months while his usual habitat was repaired. So what they did to help him cope was what any good psychiatrist would do. They put some Thorazine in his Coke. What did that do for him? Well, the zookeeper said he shuffled back and forth across his cage with dulled eyes. It was a little like watching the men in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, a review of her book that's on Wired.com today covers a couple of interesting anecdotes entitled, Even the Gorillas and Bears in Our Zoo Are Hooked on Prozac. They look at what happens when we take these drugs that we've now approved for massive use on humans and then turn around and use them on animals in the zoo. Gus, the famous polar bear from the Central Park Zoo, was put on Prozac because he was swimming for 12 hours a day. Now, as an aside, that's what polar bears do. They range over hundreds of miles, and of course, that's why you see all these pictures of polar bears sitting on ice floes looking like they're forlorn, like their habitat is melting. No, they range over several hundred miles a day. So this polar bear was swimming 12 hours a day, and they said that that is 0.00009% of his usual habitat. But of course, instead of giving him a larger habitat, which they couldn't do, they put him on Prozac to try to control his behavior. Now, some of the zookeepers who were using psychopharmaceuticals on these animals were curious if other zoos were doing the same thing. Half of the 31 institutions throughout the U.S. and Canada that responded to their survey had used psychopharmaceuticals. on their guerrilla.
Again, that's just part of the video report that he filed for the Nightly News last week, Prison Planet of the Apes. I'm going to retweet it right now from my iPhone during this break at Real Alex Jones. Spread it far and wide. Banff, Canada, Security Prosperity Partnership secret meeting from 2007, where we learned part of the text of the secret North American Union Treaty of 2005, signed in Waco, Texas at Baylor University by the Canadian Prime Minister, the U.S. President, and the Mexican President. And in that document that we cover in my film, Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, they say we will achieve North American integration and a North American Union for merger with the EU and the Pacific Union, with our corporate administrators completely bypassing the nation states. I'm paraphrasing quotes out of it. You can go read these. Judicial Watch again sued and got them. The documents, thousands of pages that I read, much of which on air was covered. And they say, we will use the threat of terrorism, border collapse, and we will use epidemics like the flu or Ebola to bring in global governance. So just as the White House former chief of staff, now the Chicago Don, Rahm Emanuel, famously said to the Wall Street Journal television, don't let a good crisis go to waste. They are using this Ebola situation that is undoubtedly the worst Ebola outbreak ever. Undoubtedly the worst Ebola outbreak ever. To sell more global handling of tracking the disease. And I want to explain something. Interviewing multiple medical doctors, Harvard medical doctors, you name it, over the years, and a lot of articles have been written about this. You can look them up for yourself. There's a lot of evidence that Ebola was developed in laboratories and then released in the jungles of Western and Central Africa in the last 30, 40 years. And that as it mutates, it will become more aggressive and even airborne. And then one of the heads of the University of Texas Biology Department, who I want to do another special report on this week, may even do it for the Nightly News tonight, Dr. Eric Pianka, who is a global exterminist. He believes that at least 90% of the population should be reduced. His acolytes, his graduate students that are now medical doctors, PhDs, microbiologists, responded to us criticizing him 6 years ago and the FBI visiting him by sending me open letters that we published saying, listen, we will exterminate everyone. Pianka is not radical enough. Humanity is a parasite and must be dealt with. In fact, here's quotes from the Texas newspapers that reported on it out of Houston. I watched in amazement as a few hundred members of the Texas Academy of Sciences rose to their feet and gave standing ovation to a speech that enthusiastically advocated the elimination of 90% of the Earth's population by airborne Ebola. That's what the newspaper reporter quoted to the Houston Chronicle. They weren't politically correct yet properly to go, of course we must exterminate everyone. While speaking to the group, on a giant movie screen behind him was projected piles of skulls from the Rwanda massacre in 1994 with a red filter. And I've seen photos of that. You can look them up online. A man standing there saying, I pray for the blessed day when the airborne weaponized Ebola is released and 90+% of the world dies as blood hemorrhages from every orifice. And now, hundreds and hundreds of deaths spreading all over Africa. There are now people on the ground in Germany that have Ebola. They're treating people at hospitals in Germany. A man collapsed before he could get on a African flight inbound to Minneapolis, St. Paul. That's the top headline up at Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com, and DrudgeReport.com from the Daily Beast. He could have brought Ebola here. Minnesota widow on her husband. Patrick Sawyer was supposed to be with his kid's birthday party in a few weeks, but he died of the virus before he could board a flight to Minneapolis. His wife spoke out on the epidemic's toll. Nigeria felt a chill from the hot zone when 40-year-old man collapsed and died from the dread Ebola virus after flying there from Liberia. That hot zone chill now reaches America with word that the same man was scheduled to fly to Minneapolis in time for the August 16th party celebrating the birthday of 2 of the 3 young daughters. Guys, can you look up 12 Monkeys and find the clip where the bioweapons worker releases the bioweapon or is bragging about it? An environmental animal rights activist. Bruce Willis has been sent back from the future to try to stop it.